Greetings everybody, it's the digital portrait drawing class. We are now in lesson 11 and we've already done portraits for front view, we've done a portrait for profile, side view, and now we hit right in between those and we tackle the infamous 3/4 view portrait. So as usual, we will begin with our sketch paper, and we've got a head reference on here that is turned just to the right by 45 degrees. Our head reference image here shows exactly how those lines bend to account for that turn. Now the central horizontal eye line, it doesn't move too far because it's being pivoted exactly horizontally, but you can see the bend in this vertical line, in this nose line here, and that's going to play an important part as we start blocking things out. But the first thing we're going to do is add some guide marks, because even though the head is turned 45 degrees to one side, a lot of the spacing that we talked about with the initial front view still applies. Let's add our guide marks here. Grab our pencil, use our blue, our guide mark blue, and just start adding those in. The eye lines are going to be more compressed on the side that's turned away. So we'll have about the same spacing here for the eyes, but it'll be a little less over here. How do you know how much less? That's one of the challenges of the 3/4 view, is that there's really no reliable way to visually calculate where that's going to go. You just got to practice at this. And I know that doesn't sound like a good answer, and I'm really sorry. But honestly, once you do a dozen or so of these, it'll sort of fall into place visually. You'll be able to sort of recognize where these are supposed to go, where things are supposed to fall, if it's too tight or if it's too far to the right. Another good thing to do is study reference images. Take pictures of yourself turned just to the side, and then study those photos and see how the side that's away from the camera is compressed and how that perspective affects the way the facial features appear. So let's go ahead and start putting in the eye lines. Okay, so now we've got short little hash marks that are going to guide us for the eye spacing, for the nose, the bottom of the nose spacing, the top and bottom of the lips, and then the top of the brow. So I've got 3 lines underneath, 1 line above, and 2 lines on either side. Now the spacing vertically doesn't change. This stays the same as it was on the front view diagram, and when we started mapping things out, that stays the same. The only thing that shifts around is the spacing that's on this side leading away from the viewer, because there's a foreshortening effect that brings things together, and the perspective of it keeps those measurements from applying directly, but they are exactly related. So let's just go ahead and start sketching some things in. Okay, I'm just going to call this a block layer, because what I'm going to do now is basically just block in the major features of the face. Okay, so I've got my eyes drawn right in between the 2 eye hash marks that I created. Now the nose does stick out from this middle point because we're not looking at it straight on. If we were looking straight onto his face, the tip of the nose would line up with this vertical point. So you sort of have to imagine this growing out from that midsection there. So really, like the central line of the nose would come out from that intersection and come down to the point. Now I drew in his brow along here because faces aren't exactly round like this, and the cheekbone protruding out a little bit, and I gave him a nice pronounced jaw because I wanted it to be a very masculine appearance to it, and so the jaw itself is much more pronounced than what we have in our reference illustration. Okay, the ear I've sketched in to meet right back here, right where these 2 egg shapes sort of meet, the vertical and the horizontal egg shapes, they meet there, and then I kept the head basically following along where that reference file was, but just quickly sketched in the hair. Okay, the eyebrows match up with the bump in the eye along the side, and the lips, well, the top divot of the lip still needs to fall underneath the middle portion of the nose, and the corner over here meets up like before with the inside of the eye. So at this point we can turn those guide marks off, and I'm going to hide the head reference file too, so we can take a closer look just at what that sketch layer looks like, where we've kind of blocked in the features. So next I'm going to add a details layer. Grab my trusty HB pencil, and then go in and just beginning to start adding details to it. I'll reshape the way the nose looks here, because I want to tighten that up some, make sure we get the bulb of it, and then the wings headed out. We also want to make sure we get the detail in the eyes done nice and tight. Okay, so I've got the eyes detailed in some, I've got the ear detailed through, the nose and the mouth, and I've also indicated some of the shading lines I want to make sure I capture. Like down here, this triangle here leading up sort of gives the little ball at the chin its shape there. The inside of the eye socket, I want to make sure we grab that, and we want to pay special attention to the way the shading works on the nose too, because that's what's going to give this the form and sort of the roundness of the nose. Of particular care is going to be the jawline, because there's a shadow underneath the jawline, and also shading out from the ear in, because the lighting most likely would be concentrated over here on the face and it would fade away. You want to make sure that you can still see that fade in the shadowing, but that it looks completely different and distinctive from the shadow that's underneath the jaw. So I'm going to put that shading layer underneath the details, grab my trusty 2B pencil, set it down to 40%, and go ahead and start giving some of these things a try. Start up here with the eye socket and just work out from there. Okay, that's a pretty good start. We're starting to see some of the form of it, and we're starting to see the way his face is sort of constructed. You can see the roundness of the muscles and the way the light falls in shadows on his face. Now this is being done with just nearly parallel, very light shading lines, which is really more of a classical style of shading, not depending on any of the new digital tricks that we've been talking about. This is a skill that you will want to develop. You don't necessarily need to have it right away, because you can still depend on some of those digital techniques that we were discussing. But if you can't do this, you will find it does limit you. Being able to create form simply by shaded lines does free you up and give you a lot more freedom in your drawing and your ability to express form and shape in your work. So at this point, let's go ahead and start detailing the hair. So I'm going to start with my HB pencil, and I'm going to just begin defining some of those locks of hair that we talked about before. I'm not scribbling, taking care not to cross over too many of the lines, because I want it to appear to be flowing solid locks of hair. It's not nearly as flowing as the female version is, because they're much shorter, but still the hair behaves the same way. Alright, now that's not so bad, but it does look like it's going to need some shadowing underneath it. So I'm going to add a hair shading layer and use my regular brush to start shading that in. Okay, we're ending up with some pretty good appearance to the shade layer there. I think it's about time that we used our fun little hair brush. Now, just like in real life, you don't need to spend as much time with a hairbrush with a guy as you do with a girl. You'll just want to be gentle with this. You only need a little bit. Alright, so at this point, I need to finish up the shading in his face and add the shading also in the neck area. Of particular note is going to be the fact that he has an Adam's apple, so you will see that in the shading down there. You just add right on to the shading layer we have here. So pick our 2B pencil again and just set to work. Alright, so that's looking really good. Pull back a little bit. Let's get our brush preview out of the way. This really isn't bad for a 3/4 portrait. You can see how the shape is defined by the shading and the lines. Again, it's critical to get the facial elements in place where they need to be, and it's very important to get the shading properly done. See the jawline, as I was talking about there, the way I handled that was darker shading underneath, lighter shading on top, and then a thin eraser line right in between there. And look just at what it was like with the block view compared to the final sketch. Now, in full honesty, guys, the three-quarter view portrait is the portrait that you will probably end up doing the most. If you try to make this a skill that you use professionally, if you're trying to do portraiture art, this is the most useful portrait position to have. It's the one where the facial features are the most prominent and they're most recognizable. It's also the view of people that we end up looking at the most. Instead of, you'd think it's straight on, but really this sort of off to the side three-quarter view is much more common. And of course, just for the fun of it, let's go ahead and do the finishing maneuver that I always tend to do. Let's group these together into our 3/4 portrait, create a merge layer of that, reduce that to 50%, duplicate that down, and run a blur layer on it. And that comes out looking like a pretty decent drawing. Okay, everybody, that's it for lesson 11. Thanks so much for watching. We've gone over that three-quarter view. We've already done the front view. We've done a side view. We've done lots of information here. We're doing really well with these portraits. Next time, lesson 12, I want to dig a little deeper into the differences that we see between the male and female portraits.